Introduce Dr. Ankur. He is a very dynamic person in our medical college. He's done his DM in neuroanesthesia from AIMS, and he is regularly conducting guest lectures in the Department of Anesthesia. So he's currently working in the Department of Anesthesia. And so, Ankur, are you ready?
Sir, I'm ready.
I'm making you a host. 1 second. Then. Ankur, you can share your slides now. You are host now.
Yeah, yes, sir. Is it visible now, sir?
Yeah, we can see the slides. Yeah.
Shall I start?
Yes, you can start.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm Dr. Ankur. And greetings from Shada Hospital. And at the outset, I would thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to interact with you on an important topic, which is total intravenous anesthesia in head and neck surgeries. To be very honest, last 6 to 7 years of my career has been in neurosurgeries. I've been conducting anesthesia for mainly for brain and spine surgeries, but of late, over the last 6 months, I've been privileged enough to join various other surgeries, particularly ENT surgeries, and which has a team of very dynamic people out here. Both academically and surgically, they are very influential. So the topic is like total intravenous anesthesia in head and neck surgeries. The idea of taking this topic is of recently very controversial, whether to go ahead with total intravenous anesthesia or inhalational anesthesia, as the evidence in mainly non-neurological surgeries are still lacking. But if we go through the evidence of neurological surgeries, mainly brain surgeries, then there is a slight drift in the practice of total intravenous anesthesia. So, what is an ideal anesthetic agent? One which has a smooth induction and maintenance of anesthesia, which allows you to have rapid onset and rapid offset. The agent which maintains hemodynamic stability, is stable over a wider range of temperatures, maintains autoregulation of different organs, wider margin of safety with minimal adverse effects, environmentally safe, widely and easily available, and cost effective. So we have a wide range of intravenous anesthetic agents in our armamentarium. Predominantly, we have the most widely used agent like propofol, and ketamine again has made a great comeback in our armamentarium. We have various other adjuvants like benzodiazepines, barbiturates, dexmedetomidine, and muscle relaxants. So total intravenous anesthesia can be administered in various ways. It can be with endotracheal tubes, it can be without endotracheal tubes, with supraglottic airways, without supraglottic airways, or with or without nasal or oral airways. So any form of TIVA can be administered with or without these agents. And to maintain a stable depth of anesthesia, any combination of these total intravenous anesthesia agents can be used. So multiple studies and abundant literature are available where the feasibility and the safety of this combination has been widely established, and you can see the name has been given for agents like Ketodex-Tiva, means ketamine and dexmedetomidine can be combined. Ketomet Tiva means ketamine and midazolam can be combined, like KPD Tiva, like ketamine, propofol, and dexmedetomidine. So all these group of drugs can be combined in various ways, and more or less the safety and the feasibility has been confirmed. But again, of course, depends on patient to patient. So how we deliver total intravenous anesthesia? So it can be delivered by either a manually targeted infusion, where we know the specific doses of the drugs, and the anesthesia has to be uh, maintained as per the standard bispectral values of 40 to 60, where we ensure an adequate depth of anesthesia. Unlike inhalational anesthetic agents, where we have the vaporizers delivering the inhalational anesthetic agents, and we measure the depth of anesthesia with monitored anesthesia, which minimal alveolar concentrations. That these are known as MAC values. However, again, that is a disadvantage to TIVA, because TIVA doesn't follow minimal alveolar concentrations. It has to be monitored by some other monitors like bispectral index values. Like you might have seen the electrodes being put on the forehead and those values being displayed on the monitor. So this is one form of delivery of total intravenous anesthesia, which is known as manually controlled infusions, where we know the specific doses of the drugs and we can titrate the drugs up and down based on the bispectral values. Again, we have specific machines, or we have infusions pumps which deliver these agents by target control infusions, and these are more pharmacologically correct and more pharmacokinetically correct, and these drugs are delivered based on pharmacokinetic principles, where uh, where the drugs act based on effect site concentration and plasma site concentration. As you can see on the rightmost top diagram, when the drug is being injected by the infuser pump, the drug first enters the central compartment, and then it gets distributed into the peripheral compartment, and then to the effect site concentration. And when the concentration of the drug in the effect site and the central as well as the peripheral compartment gets established, then the stable depth of anesthesia is established. So we have various infuser pumps, and we have specific models for delivery of this total intravenous anesthetics. For example, the most commonly used for propofol are Marsh model and Schneider model. Similarly, for various other agents, we have different types of models. For example, remifentanil, we have the Minto model, which is very popular abroad. However, we are unfortunate that in India, we still do not have remifentanil. For ketamine, we have the Domino model, and we have DYCK model for dexmedetomidine. Now, why there is a sudden and persistent talk on shifting to total intravenous anesthesia? Why anesthesiologists or why intensivists over the globe are now reluctant to use volatile anesthetic agents? If you go through this review, which was published in 2018, it is an excellent review which was published by Manetman and Kofke et al., which evaluated multiple papers over the last 15 years, and they found that high dose inhaled agents are associated with post-operative cognitive dysfunctions, particularly when these inhaled anesthetics are occasionally implemented in status asthmaticus, status epilepticus, and ICU sedations. Then they have to have administered for a longer duration of time. The more longer they are administered, they have the higher chances of causing post-operative cognitive dysfunctions. And moreover, there have been multiple models, multiple evidence from both from animal and human studies that there is an evidence of neurotoxicity caused by volatile anesthetic agents. And this is now being reflected in recent studies as well. So are we making a paradigm shift from inhalational anesthetics to total intravenous anesthesia for head and neck surgeries? Yes, the evidence is still not very convincing, but yes, I've tried my best to collect some evidence over the last 15 years, and we will have a look at all these evidences. But yes, for neurosurgeries, particularly brain surgeries, there has been a definitive drift from inhalational anesthetic agents to intravenous anesthetic agents. If we look through the overall properties of total intravenous anesthesia on multiple systems. Central nervous systems, total intravenous anesthetic causes reduction in the intracranial pressure, cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen consumption, and maintenance of cerebral autoregulation, which, unlike with inhalational anesthetic agents, at a MAC value of 1.5 MAC, they tend to abolish the cerebral autoregulation, and then there is a drastic increase in the intracranial pressure secondary to cerebral vasodilatation. So this is the primary reason as to why anesthetist or a neuroanesthetist would always prefer a total intravenous anesthetic agent over an inhalational anesthetic agents. If we look into the renal system, there is biological evidence of reduced ischemia and reperfusion injuries with total intravenous anesthesia, as well as there is reduction in the incidence of acute kidney injury. As gastrointestinal system, there is reduction in the post-operative nausea vomiting, which is also very higher with ENT surgeries, oncological surgeries. Yes, this is one of the main reason in multiple cancer surgeries. If you go through the literature, the cancer surgeries, total intravenous anesthesia has been found to cause a reduction in the cancer recurrence. This is probably one of the most recent evidence of TIVA as to why TIVA is being preferred. That is, it causes reduction in the cancer recurrence. Both brain cancer, rectal surgeries, GI surgeries, studies have been conducted for almost all types of cancer surgeries, and TIVA has been found to be beneficial. Regarding post-operative cognitive dysfunction in elderly patients, again, as I said, it reduces the incidence of post-operative cognitive dysfunctions, and it reduces the incidence of dementias. So probably it is beneficial in cases of elderly population. Again, post-operative pain has been seen to be reduced with total intravenous anesthesia. Similarly, it has found beneficial in immune system with regards to its free radical scavenging property, antioxidant, anti-apoptosis, and anti-inflammatory. So this is a schematic representation of effects of TIVA on various organ systems based on the recent evidences. Now let us take an insight into the various evidence from ENT surgeries, and I'm very shocked when I looked into the literature as to why the literature is still lacking, and probably it's time that I, along with, in collaboration with Department of ENT, should take up some projects, to convince to make the evidence convincing.
Yeah, Ankur, we are always ready.
Yeah, yes, sir. We need to take up surgeries only because when I went through these literatures, I found the literatures are lacking, and definitely it's time we need to take up some projects now. So, if we go into the evidence of total intravenous anesthesia and ear surgery, so what changes in middle ear pressure do? A change in the middle ear pressure during middle ear surgery can cause a rupture in the tympanic membrane. It can cause a displacement of a tympanic membrane graft. It can cause hemotympanum, temporary or permanent hearing loss, and failure in ossicular chain repair. So an increase in the middle ear pressure due to inhalant anesthesia may cause effusion to be pushed out of the middle ear via the eustachian tube. This may cause an ear, which was preoperatively diagnosed as otitis media with effusion, to be found dry during surgery. And it may lead to a wrong decision about insertion of a tympanostomy tube. So there has been recommendation from various societies to switch off nitrous oxide, if at all it is being used, 30 minutes before the placement of the graft. And more so, there are multiple studies which have found that inhalational anesthesia can cause increase in the middle ear pressure. So this was an RCT which was conducted in 2006 and which evaluated the comparison of sevoflurane with total intravenous anesthesia, propofol, on middle ear pressure on 25 male children, of which 13 were administered propofol and 12 were administered sevoflurane. And what the authors found that in sevoflurane group, there was an mean middle ear pressure values in 24 years of 12 boys showed a significant increase after the anesthesia with sevoflurane. So sevoflurane may increase the middle ear pressure, and Tiva with propofol may be used in middle ear operations more safely than sevoflurane. That is what the authors have recommended. Irrespective of the agents used, whether sevoflurane or nitrous oxide or desflurane or halothane, do the airway devices we use intraoperatively have any influence on the middle ear pressure? So this was an RCT which was published again in 2006 in Anesthesia Analgesia, where they evaluated the effect of airway device used with middle ear pressure. So 80 consecutive anesthetized paralyzed patients were randomly allocated for airway management with orally inserted endotracheal tube, number one. Number two, classic laryngeal mask airway. Number three, laryngeal mask airway. And number four, laryngeal tube with nitrous oxide and without nitrous oxide. So what they found was baseline values for middle ear pressure were similar. Okay, baseline pressures were similar with nitrous oxide or without nitrous oxide, but middle ear pressure were always higher when the nitrous was switched on. So as soon as nitrous was switched on, middle ear pressures tended to increase, and there were no differences in middle ear pressure among the airway devices in the nitrous or the air tubes. So irrespective of the airway devices we use in the for the conduction of surgery, it has no effect on the middle ear pressure. The only effect has been found with the use of the anesthetic agents. What is the evidence based on post-operative nausea, vomiting, pain, and surgical conditions? Interesting to see that even in middle ear surgery, there was evidence for improved surgical conditions with Tiva. It was a double-blinded RCT enrolling 100 patients, where two groups were. In one group, there was balanced anesthesia using fentanyl, propofol, and isoflurane, and in another group, they had administered propofol with remifentanil. And interestingly, they found that the overall incidence of PONV, that is post-operative nausea vomiting, was significantly low in patients who were administered propofol. And even though pain scores were similar, and conditions for surgery were found to be better in group B, that is propofol. So even in middle ear surgery, they found that the conditions for improved surgical field was better with propofol. Again, it was a surgery which was conducted in patients undergoing mastectomy and tympanoplasty, which had compared propofol and remifentanil versus balanced anesthesia with sevoflurane. And what they found was the incidence of post-operative nausea and vomiting and complete responses were assessed at 1 and 24 hours after the surgery. And they found that total intravenous anesthesia with propofol and remifentanil resulted in significantly lower incidence and severity of post-operative nausea vomiting. So whatever the articles I'm citing, those articles are from very, very standard journals. Now let us look at the evidence from nasal surgeries. So as we all know, the evidence, highest evidence comes from meta-analysis and systematic reviews. So I won't go to the RCTs. Let us directly look into the meta-analysis of effect of Tiva on surgical visibility, blood loss, and hemodynamics in nasal surgeries. So the first meta-analysis is a very recent meta-analysis which was published in 2020 in Laryngoscope. It evaluated the effect of Tiva versus inhalational anesthetic on endoscopic sinus surgery. It enrolled 15 RCTs, which included around 83rd odd endoscopic sinus surgery patients, in which 47 of the patients were 47% of the patients were administered Tiva and 53% of the patients were administered inhalational anesthetics. And similarly, very recent, which has not yet been published but is ahead of print in American Journal of Rhinology and Allergy, again it has evaluated the role of anesthesia, that is Tiva versus inhalational anesthetic agents on endoscopic sinus surgery. And both the meta-analysis which included 15 RCTs and 19 RCTs, they have found a absolutely similar results, and the results states as significantly superior visibility scores for TIVA compared to inhalational anesthetics agent. Blood loss was significantly less following TIVA, and there was no difference in the hemodynamic parameters. So without any difference in the hemodynamic parameters, the surgical visibility and the blood loss were, were better with TIVA. If we look at the emergence agitation, and this was an RCT which was again very recently published in 2019, where they had looked, on the emergence agitation after nasal sinus surgeries, and it enrolled 80 patients, in which 40 were administered TIVA and 40 were again administered inhalational anesthetics. And what they found was emergence agitation measured by Wickman agitation sedation score occurred in just 2.5% of the patients in TIVA group as compared to inhalational anesthetic agents, which had 20% incidence. Similarly, another scale which was used was Riker agitation sedation scale, in which again they found that 2.5% versus 25%. So almost, the incidence of emergence agitation is 10 times more with inhalational anesthetic agents as compared to TIVA. So for a smoother recovery, free of agitation, probably TIVA would be more feasible and advisable. This was again very recent RCT published in 2020, and again it looked at the emergence agitation after rhinoplasty surgeries, and it found that as compared to sevoflurane, TIVA caused shorter early emergence times, less bleeding, higher surgeon satisfaction rates, and lower emergency agitation scores. So see, not only it is satisfying the anesthetic parameters, the surgeons are also satisfied.
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, this was a recent RCT published in 2019, which looked into the quality of recovery after endoscopic sinus surgeries. In this group, the quality of recovery had been measured by quality of recovery score 40, and they looked at the parameters at 6 hours before the surgery, 6 hours after the surgery, and post-operative day 1. And what they found that at 6 hours after the surgery, the quality of recovery score was significantly higher in the TIVA group as compared to the desflurane group. So desflurane was used in this study, and TIVA resulted in less blood loss. So less blood loss, emergence agitation, quality of recovery, all are in favor of total intravenous anesthesia as compared to inhalational anesthetic agents. Let us come to TIVA and oral, facial, or neck surgeries. Very few evidence for it. They look at this study published in 2016. They looked at the feasibility of conduction of total intravenous anesthesia on orthogenic surgical procedures, in which they had induced anesthesia with propofol as well as maintained anesthesia with propofol. And what they found was there was no significant change in the mean heart rate and mean blood pressure at different time intervals from baseline value to 30 minutes after the recovery. And they advised that and they commented on the feasibility of total intravenous anesthesia in such procedures to be very, very safe. Regarding quality of recovery after these surgeries, this was an RCT which enrolled 80 patients, all were female patients, and these were on thyroid surgeries, and in which TIVA group were again 40 patients who received TCI, propofol, and remifentanil, and on the other group they had received desflurane. And what they found was that on post-operative day 1, the quality of recovery was significantly higher in the TIVA group as compared to the DES group. And among the 5 dimensions of the quality of recovery, physical comfort and physical independence were significantly better on post-operative day 1 and day 2 in the TIVA group. Regarding the role of total intravenous anesthesia and airway maneuvers, so this was a study which was conducted published in 2012 in Pediatric Anesthesia, where the authors had, evaluated the effect of propofol, remifentanil, and spontaneous ventilation on airway foreign body removal in children in those children who had already come with preoperative respiratory impairment. So foreign body removal using a rigid bronchoscope under propofol, remifentanil, tiva, and spontaneous ventilation in 65 pediatric patients who presented with respiratory distress. So the results, the mean induction time was around 12 minutes. There was no severe breath holding or body movements were observed, and SpO2 below 90% occurred in just 10 cases,
I have told the mistakes.
and there was no progressive desaturation. The mean EtCO2 at the end of the procedure was 7.9 kilopascal and returned to normal 5 minutes after the procedure.
तो मिड लेयर में मास दिखा रही है.
And most importantly, in the post-anesthesia care unit, there was no evidence of any complication, no hypoxemia was observed, no laryngospasm, no pneumothorax, and no arrhythmias were observed. So this study is one of the, a very renowned studies which evaluated the feasibility of total intravenous anesthesia for foreign body removal in children. Regarding awake intubation, we do a lot of awake fiber optic intubations with difficult airways, particularly those ENT procedures which have oral, oral pathologies manifesting as difficult airways. So it's very effective both for conscious sedation as well as for mild sedation. Use of propofol without dexamethasone or without remifentanil. So the feasibility has already been widely established. There are a good number of databases and good number of literatures available on the use of total intravenous anesthetic agents for conduction of awake fiber optic intubations. And TIVA and neuromonitoring, yes, many centers do neuromonitoring, but especially when I was in AIMS, we used to do, it had become almost a standard of care in neurosurgeries, particularly tumors involving in and around the eloquent areas and tumor of the spine and tumor of the posterior fossa, particularly vestibular schwannomas. So it has become almost a standard of care. And as we know, there are two components, particularly of intraoperative neuromonitoring, like amplitude and latency. So almost there is no dearth of literature. There is abundant literature. There are abundant recommendations from various society that inhalational anesthetics causes a dose-dependent reduction in the amplitude and prolongation of the latencies, thereby interfering with the surgical signals intraoperatively. So probably now TIVA has been widely established whenever neuromonitoring procedures are being done. But as far as I looked into the ENT procedures, the evidence was still lacking, even though I found one good study which was published in Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgeries in 2020. It's a recent RCT which evaluated the influence of sevoflurane based anesthesia versus total intravenous anesthesia or intraoperative neuromonitoring during thyroidectomy. So what they could have monitored during thyroidectomy? Simple. It was recurrent laryngeal nerve. So 20 patients had received propofol and 20 patients had received sevoflurane. And intraoperative neuromonitoring was performed intermittently during surgery. That is, recurrent laryngeal nerve monitoring was done by vagal nerve stimulation by direct stimulation. And what they found was that the time until detection of the first electromyographic signal was significantly lower in the group S, okay, than in group E. All patients in propofol group had a positive EMG signal at initial monitoring, whereas only 40% of the patients in group S got that initial EMG signal. So the results are clearly evident. If you have to have a good intraoperative neuromonitoring signals, you better switch on to total intravenous anesthesia rather than playing with the upper and lower doses of inhalational anesthetic agents. And the final word on total intravenous anesthesia and COVID-19. And just because of this COVID-19 pandemic, this CME, which was scheduled a week back on physical mode, has now been shifted to virtual mode and rightly done so. And we are badly hit by COVID-19 pandemic and more so by the second wave. And this was consensus published in American Journal of Otolaryngology, which themselves, they said that it's better to use total intravenous anesthesia in ambulatory otolaryngology surgeries during the COVID-19 pandemic, based on the fact that there is a reduction in the potential spread of the virus through reduction in the coughing. There was a very good RCT which was published in 2012 in British Journal of Anesthesia, which had evaluated the effect of total intravenous anesthesia versus inhalational anesthetics on coughing after the surgery, and they had found that the incidence of coughing was significantly lower because of suppression of the airway reflexes, or rather than non-exaggerated response of the airway reflexes. And secondly, there was a significant decrease the time spent in the recovery room. So COVID-19 pandemic, because of the inhalational anesthetic agents, and secondly, because of the coughing, it's probably better to use during this COVID-19 pandemic. And we have again some more drugs in our armamentarium. 1% propofol we had been using, and now it's available 2% propofol, which has a theoretical advantage of less frequency of triglyceridemia, and remimazolam, which is a very rapid, which has a very rapid onset and rapid offset of action. It's a congener of midazolam, and still not available in India, but hoping that it would soon be available in India and would be under our armamentarium. And it's one of my favorite drug, a drug which was almost in the phase of getting obsolete in India, has made a tremendous recovery, great comeback by ketamine, whether you look at the pre-hospital management or you look at the traumatic brain injury, non-traumatic neurological illness, or any facial injury, patient in shock, patient requiring intraoperative neuromonitoring, patient of severe depression, pain, agitation, because of the fantastic properties of ketamine of maintaining hemodynamic stability, maintaining the airway reflexes, and maintaining the intraoperative neuromonitoring parameters, and more so, it has, multiple studies have conferred its neuroprotective properties, and so it is now being widely used as a last resort for its anti-epileptic action. So in AIIMS, we used to use ketamine in refractory and super refractory status epilepticus as a last resort, where the patient used to throw seizures for 3 days, 4 days, and any seizures more than 24 hours non-responsive to one benzodiazepine and another anesthetic agents is termed as super refractory status epilepticus. Ketamine, because of its NMDA receptor antagonistic property and because of its neuroprotective properties, it is now being widely used in control of super refractory status epilepticus. You can go through the literature. Those literature are very convincing. So even though the evidence is still scanty, I would rather say, but yes, looking at the whatever evidence available, there is a slight drift, or probably there is more evidence in favor of total intravenous anesthesia in compared to inhalational anesthetics. But yes, let me remind you that the long-term effects have not yet been established, or probably the studies have not looked into the long-term outcome of these patients, for example, like 1 year, 5 years, unlike those evidence coming from neurological surgeries where they have looked into the long-term consequences. So in ENT surgeries, we still need to ascertain the long-term benefit, but yes, for short-term benefit and for intraoperative conditions and to minimize the complications, TIVA can be a better agent, or agents used in TIVA can be better as compared to inhalational anesthetics agents. So I would like to end my session. Thank you so much.
Brilliant presentation, Dr. Ankur.
Thank you, sir.
Regarding the newer concept is coming, the combined intravenous volatile anesthesia. Can you give some light over that?
Again, there are multiple studies in various types of surgeries which have evaluated the effect of combined anesthesia, as I mentioned in my slides also. Combined anesthesia is nothing but they utilize both inhalational anesthetic agents and total intravenous anesthetic agents. Now the problem with TIVA is like when you administer TIVA, you have to have administered probably the most agent widely used is propofol. So we administer propofol combined with either with a adjuvant like fentanyl. In India, we don't have remifentanil, so we use fentanyl. Propofol infusion with a fentanyl infusion. We don't use inhalational anesthetics. For example, we won't use nitrous oxide. We won't use uh, any inhalational anesthetic agents. This is the protocol in TIVA. And we would monitor the depth of anesthesia by a bispectral index value by electrodes placed on the forehead. That is what we do in TIVA. If you are using, or if we are using muscle relaxant for that procedure, then it's fine enough. Then the lower doses of TIVA can be very good for maintaining the depth of anesthesia. Okay. However, those procedures which require intraoperative neuromonitoring, for example, majority of the neurosurgeries which require neuromonitoring, then we can't use muscle relaxant because we won't be able to monitor the nerves. In that case, in the absence of muscle relaxation, we definitely have to administer higher doses of propofol. It's very obvious. We'll have to administer higher doses of propofol so that the patient doesn't buck or cough on the endotracheal tube during the intraoperative period. So in that case, propofol, since it is a sympatholytic agent, it causes drop in the blood pressure and it causes a drop in the heart rate. So that there is a tendency of hypotension and bradycardia with propofol if we are not using it with muscle relaxant. That is the reason as to why people use balanced anesthesia, just to reduce the dose of propofol, and they would take some nitrous oxide. They will take some nitrous oxide which will maintain the depth of anesthesia without causing any more hemodynamic changes. And then because nitrous oxide is maintaining some anesthesia, you can reduce the dose of propofol. So this is a concept of balanced anesthesia. Whenever you are expecting some complications arising out of propofol, whether it be hypotension or whether be you don't have the adequate supply of propofol. For example, you have only 2 vials left with you or 4 vials left with you, and the surgery is to last for 6 to 7 hours. Now you don't have any option. You have to cut down the dose of propofol so as to suffice for the rest of the surgery. In that case, you'll have to definitely take some anesthetic agents for that procedure. So balanced anesthesia definitely has no definite advantages over TIVA. But yes, in those cases where do you expect some complications or some side effects arising out of TIVA, then you can obviously add up some uh, this one. For example, I'll cite one example. For example, if you are doing a mastectomy or a tympanoplasty, you are ready to put a graft. So 30 minutes before the placement of the graft, from the beginning of surgery, we can use nitrous oxide. There is no harm using nitrous oxide. Just 30 minutes prior to the placement of the graft, we can switch off the nitrous oxide and we can increase the dose of propofol so as to maintain the depth of anesthesia. This is how we utilize balanced anesthesia, TIVA, for such procedures. But again, if we are supposed to use intraoperative neuromonitoring, then TIVA is the only option. Balanced anesthesia is discredited in that category.
How you manage your post-operative nausea and vomiting (PNV) in past cases or skull-based case?
So first we identify the risk factors. So there are a lot of risk factors for post-operative nausea, vomiting, particularly uh, 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 where non-smokers, then history of post-operative nausea, vomiting. There is a previous history of post-operative nausea, vomiting, or there is a pre-operative history of motion sickness. There is a intraoperative use of opioids. For example, fentanyl. We would be using fentanyl for almost all the surgeries. So intraoperative use of opioids, intraoperative use of volatile anesthetic agents, and non-smokers. So these are various risk factors for and morbid obesity and surgeries in and around the vagal nerve. For example, facial surgeries where maxillomandibular reflexes might be precipitated, or in squint surgeries where you have oculocardiac reflexes can be precipitated. They can trigger post-operative nausea, vomiting, or patients with full stomach. So we need to first of all classify those high-risk patients who would likely to have a higher incidence of post-operative nausea, vomiting. In those cases, first of all, there will be definitely some modifiable risk factors. They can be non-modifiable risk factors. In modifiable risk factors, for example, we can replace the opioids with NSAIDs intraoperatively for control of pain. we can cut down the volatile anesthetic agents. We can go ahead with Tiva, and then obviously we use prophylaxis. The first and the most commonly used agent is the ondansetron, which we usually administer 30 minutes before the completion of the surgery in a dose of around 0.1 milligram per kg. So we control the modifiable factors and we then administer prophylactic agent, which is the most commonly ondansetron. Once we extubate the trachea, the most important again thing is again we maintain the hemodynamic parameters. Any evidence, any hypotension, and that too for prolonged period, then that can trigger post-operative nausea, vomiting. So do not allow hemodynamic parameters to fluctuate too much. Second, once the surgery has been completed, patient has been shifted to recovery ward. Despite ondansetron, if the patient is still there is post-operative nausea, vomiting, then another second dose of ondansetron has to be administered. That is what the recommendations say. If the second dose of ondansetron doesn't control the post-operative nausea, vomiting, then we usually administer a dexamethasone, which is a third-line agent. Around 4 to 8 milligram would be good enough for an adult 60 kg patients. So this is how we manage post-operative nausea, vomiting. And also most important, during the nasal and the oral surgeries, we make sure that we put an adequate throat pack so that the blood doesn't get into the gastric cavity, which again is a triggering agent for post-operative nausea. So control of the modifiable factors, prophylaxis, and then
Regarding inhalation anesthesia, what you prefer in case of suppose a skull-based surgery or a functional sinus surgery, say, desflurane or isoflurane?
Yes, so we have a couple of agents like isoflurane, which came first, then came sevoflurane, and then came desflurane. Okay. So depending on the preoperative status of the patient, if we are conducting a skull-based surgery and the preoperative intracranial pressure is high, the tumor is large, causing midline shift, causing mass effect, and the patient is symptomatic, or probably the patient has a low preoperative Glasgow Coma scale, then definitely we need to administer an agent which has a minimal effect on the cerebral autoregulation. Okay, so ideal would be Tiva, but yes, if you are not going ahead with Tiva, you can use a volatile anesthetic agent. So which volatile anesthetic to be administered? So sevoflurane is one such agent which causes minimal cerebral vasodilatation. Okay, desflurane causes maximal cerebral vasodilatation. Of course, halothane and enflurane also causes, but halothane is almost an obsolete nowadays. It's been, even there are no vaporizers of halothane. So I will talk of only desflurane and isoflurane and sevoflurane. Desflurane causes the maximal cerebral vasodilatation. So in that case, particularly, we will not be using desflurane because of maximal cerebral vasodilatation. It can cause an increase in ICP. Despite the advantages of desflurane, that it is one such agent which has faster onset and faster recovery, more favorable in patients with morbid obesity or elderly patients, or in such group of patients, desflurane is preferred. But when intracranial pressure comes into play, desflurane will definitely not be a choice. I would always go with the sevoflurane. Sevoflurane, in fact, it has a better property. It has also a very good property of faster emergence from anesthesia. But a second scenario where a patient has been, there is a very small tumor in the skull base, there is no mass effect, there is no midline shift, patient is absolutely fine preoperatively, there is no deterioration in the GCS, then there are multiple studies which have evaluated the effect of these three agents. All three agents are similar. All three agents are similar with regards to intraoperative brain conditions and regards to post-operative recovery profile. Then there is no comparison. But yes, if the patient has a large tumor and all those compensated, decompensated parameters, then definitely sevoflurane will be a better choice in such cases. And of course, the availability. Desflurane is not available in many of the centers because it's very, very costly. In fact, in our center also, in our OT, we don't have desflurane. So desflurane is very, very costly. So because of that issue, it's not being available in many of the centers. Definitely, it has a very faster and faster recovery. It's very good in morbid obesity patients. And the main reason as to why we are drifting off over TIVA as compared to total intravenous anesthesia is number one, because of environmental pollution. These inhalational anesthetic agents are very, very notorious when it comes to ozone layer depletion. And desflurane has the highest propensity to cause ozone layer depletion, almost 26 times more environmental pollutant as compared to sevoflurane. So that is why desflurane, despite its so many favorable properties, it's being discredited globally. And that in those ways, TIVA would be a much better agent if we intend to take care of the environment. And the obvious, not only the environment, also the OT atmospheric pollution would be reduced. Hello. Hello.
What is the combination of drug you will prefer for TIVA, especially in your ENT surgeries?
Okay, so had I been residing in US, UK, I would have abundant drugs of which I could have decided. But yes, where we have a
The
limited
list
drugs,
which you have shown earlier.
With the limited drugs available, yes, propofol is the most commonly used agent. It's the most used, not in only in India, it's the globally used. So propofol is the most commonly used agent. In addition to that, we use an opioid, that is fentanyl, which is again most commonly used in India. In abroad, they are using remifentanil because they have remifentanil with them. So we use propofol, fentanyl, and then we use another agent. For example, we can go ahead with dexmedetomidine, which is a alpha adrenergic agonistic drug, which again has a tendency to reduce the blood loss secondary to reduction in the blood pressure and the heart rate. Also, maintains the conscious sedation level. So any combination of these drugs, my favorite combination is to use ketamine with the propofol. Okay.
And
So
the preferred drug you will use in the procedure which we commonly do for sleep apnea, DICE surgery, DICE procedure, drug-induced sleep endoscopy.
So
Which
that
is
is
the
what, that is what I wanted to say. Ketofol, that is known as ketofol, a combination of ketamine and the
ketamine and
propofol.
propofol.
Because this combination is so very nice. Propofol has a sympatholytic activity where it causes hypotension and bradycardia, and ketamine has exactly the opposite effect of it, where it causes the increase in the blood pressure and the heart rate. So there is the effect of propofol is being taken care of by ketamine. And definitely the dose of propofol would be reduced in after you add ketamine. So ketofol is a wonderful drug.
Will prefer ketofol over dexmed in
Yeah,
DICE.
it depends on patient to patient, but yes, in most of the time we would better use ketofol. In fact, my dissertation in AIIMS was evaluation of the effect of propofol versus ketofol in transcranial motor potential monitoring in spine surgeries, and I found an excellent result of ketofol over propofol in maintaining the intraoperative neuromonitoring potentials, as well as number two, maintenance of the hemodynamic parameters. So hardly there was any patient who had suffered intraoperative hypotension with ketofol. And secondly, there was, because you are reducing the dose of both propofol as well as ketofol, you are not using any of the agent in full dose. You are cutting down those dose of propofol, cutting down the dose of ketofol. So the ketamine, which was mainly discredited for its psychedelic effects. So if you cut down the dose of ketamine, the psychedelic effects would be definitely very, very less. So ketofol is a good combination.
Thank you so much, sir. That was helpful.
Yes, thank you, Ankur. That was a very comprehensive presentation.
Hello.
Hello.
नहीं, दोनों ही नीचे हैं। ओके।
Ranjana Kumari, you can unmute yourself. I think. Mute yourself. Okay. So Ankur, that was a very brilliant presentation. Obviously, we will be going for a research project with
Yes.
in Department of Anesthesia. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you to all the organizers who have put forward such brilliant efforts in conducting this CME even during these tough times. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Only a poster. So that on the behalf of Department of ENT, Sardar Hospital, I thank all the participants who has taken their they have taken out their time, and from their busy schedule they have attended this online CME. All the lectures were very informative academically, and we can apply in our clinical practice also. So once again, I thank all of you to be patient listeners. Again, we will be conducting the CME in, I think, next month or so. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Can we leave?